It's difficult enough for parents when you say, Mum, Dad, I've become a Muslim. You don't want to do the thing where you turn up on the doorstep with the headscarf on going, right, where's my halal meat? Get rid of all this alcohol in the house. You don't want to do that. You have to approach it with a certain amount of tact.
When I got off the plane from Iran, I was the only woman under 60 wearing hijab. I just didn't feel comfortable taking the scarf off. And that was really hard, going through Heathrow with the scarf on, thinking, I don't know what's going on, I'm not making this choice.
I thought the hard part would be the research, and then I'd be a Muslim and we could get on with life. And actually, I felt that I've had to fight all the time to be afforded the basic credibility, politeness, respect, which I feel was afforded to me my entire life and which I took for granted.
3 women, all white and living in Britain, aged between 26 and 44, but otherwise from different backgrounds. But they have one thing in common. They embraced Islam after becoming curious following the atrocities of 9/11. I'm Miriam O'Reilly, and in this edition of Heart and Soul from the BBC World Service, I'm going to hear their stories and find out what drew them to the religion that was used as a badge by the 9/11 perpetrators, a religion that has exposed them to public hostility, opposition from their families, and in the eyes of their non-Muslim sisters, a way of life which subjugates and oppresses women.
In 2001, we estimate that there were about 60,000 converts. That figure may now have risen as high as 100,000.
Kevin Bryce is a researcher at the University of Wales who's been studying converts. And by tracking census figures, he's found a significant increase in the number of white women turning to Islam.
Pre-2001, it was just over 50%. Whereas post-2001 it's approaching 70%. So it does seem that over time, and certainly in the last 10 years, that there's been significantly more women than men who are converting to Islam.
What is the appeal for white women?
There's an indication that there's a dissatisfaction with, in inverted commas, Western life, that the place of women, the role of women in modern society is not offering the answers that people are looking for, and so they're turning to, say, Islam as offering an alternative.
The view of Islam is one of a repressive religion where women are subjugated.
Yes, and irrespective of how correct that view is, it is a widely held view. And so for people who don't have an understanding, to take that first step to start to want to have an understanding does still need to be explained.
Maybe we're more inquisitive, or maybe women, in the way that I did, felt from a feminist perspective that we needed to understand why this faith was oppressing women, and then actually looked into it and thought, well, actually, the problems are a bit more complicated than the faith oppressing women. And actually, this faith is very interesting. I want to know more.
On the 11th of September 2001, Miriam Francoise Serra, daughter of a French father and an Irish mother, was studying at Cambridge University. She'd been an actor since the age of 10, having played the young Margaret Dashwood in the film Sense and Sensibility, alongside Hollywood stars Kate Winslet and Emma Thompson. On the day the Twin Towers came down, her perception of Islam changed.
The repercussions of September the 11th were felt acutely on campus, as they were across the world, really. There was a very latent tension, and one could feel that suddenly people were being seen as Muslims, whereas before they may not have been identified as any different to anybody else. And that bothered me, and that made me want to learn a little bit more.
Did it never jar with your feelings as a feminist, the way women are treated within Islam, or appear to be?
Certainly, my feminist crusade against my Muslim friends began on that premise, which was that this religion is terrible, it mistreats its women and all the rest of it. But actually, it was then that the more I sort of learnt about things, the more I realised you can't blame third world culture, in other words, economic poverty, unemployment, political dictatorships. You know, you start being able to distinguish the faith from the other circumstances, the other issues that are holding women back from being fully emancipated.
One of the best-known converts to Islam in Britain is Lauren Booth, sister-in-law to the former Prime Minister Tony Blair.
The more you ask people, the more you'll find that 9/11 was a real trigger in the world, not just for an awakening of a kind of right-wing seeking for another enemy post-Cold War. It was actually an awakening for people who wondered, there's the Twin Towers, there are these planes hitting, who is Bush going to smash? Who is he going to make the enemy? And when you saw it was Islam and it was Muslims and it was some of the poorest regions in the world, many people, aside from myself, thought, well, what is this about? Have they just been hiding amongst us with their evil beards and rocket-hiding turbans and their mutilated women? How come we've never noticed them before?
It was on Lauren's subsequent visits to Gaza and the West Bank that she began to feel an emotional pull towards Islam, which became stronger in 2008 when she knocked on a door in the Rafah refugee camp.
And the woman who opened it said to me, "Salamu alaikum, fadal, peace be upon you, welcome." With a smile of such sweetness and openness, it was as if she was inviting me into the Taj Mahal. Not a slum when you go into one room and there are 16 filthy mattresses lining the walls. And I was angry. I said to this woman, "Your Allah doesn't care about you. Look at the way you live." And I said, "So why do you fast in Ramadan when life in Gaza is so hard?" And she looked at me with such gentleness and she said, "Sister, we fast to remember the poor." And something in my heart unlocked and a very clear thought came into my head, and it was, if this is Islam, I want it. If this level of contentment with nothing, if this belief in the goodness for others when you have less than nothing, if this openness and trust is Islam, please let me be a part of it.
I'm following a stream of hundreds of people who are crossing a field here in the middle of Lincoln on a beautiful summer's day. We're gathering for Jummah, Friday prayers, and this is the Living Islam Festival, which has been organised by the Islamic Society of Britain. And about 4,000 people are here to praise Allah and to promote peace and harmony.
In order to be ritually clean for prayer, you wash your hands, your face, your arms, you wipe over the head and you wash your feet, so that when you go to pray, you're clean.
We've come to the Living Islam Festival in Lincoln in northern England to meet Fataha Imman. Fataha means the opening after the first chapter of the Quran. It's not the name her parents gave her. It's the one she chose in order to make a clear statement of her new identity when she converted to Islam. Fataha was brought up as a Catholic in a white middle-class home in a small coastal town in the south of England. It was while she was studying in the very multicultural city of Leicester and sharing a house with Muslim friends that she picked up a book called The Islamist by Ed Hussein, a British Muslim who's had first-hand experience of radical Islam.
He was talking about people getting sucked into extremism. And because I was living with Muslims at the time, I was able to talk to them about it. And I was able to have them say, look, this isn't the be-all and end-all of our religion. This is just a tiny part of how some people interpret it.
Don't you think it's interesting, though, that the thing that sparked your interest was reading about a terror group?
I suppose it is, in a way. It is a little bit strange. But I've heard a lot of people, leaders of mosques and so on, have said that post 9/11 and post 7/7, there's been a rush of people interested in Islam because suddenly everybody's talking about this religion and everybody's saying it's this, it's that, it's the violence. And so there's lots of people that are saying, is this true? And trying to find the answers, trying to read up about it and see what it's like. And I mean, post 9/11, I didn't necessarily rush straight away to look at those things. But this was a book that was available to me. And the unexpected consequence was I actually discovered more about the religion, and that's, I think, happened for a lot of people, that trying to get to the root of why everybody's saying it's such a violent religion has led them to actually understand the more normal side of it, which is the most common side of it, which is the side that people are living every day. And then obviously I was living with Muslims and I was talking to Muslims and they were my friends, and being surrounded by them, it showed me the side of Islam that you don't see when you're reading the news, because the news is all about the bad guys and something exploded or somebody got shot or whatever. The reality that I was living was so completely different to that. It forced me to acknowledge that part of it is just minute, the tiny sort of little fringe mad people at the edge who want to do crazy stuff. But that most people are just normal and living their normal lives. They want to be friends, they want to make you dinner, they want to sit and chat. And that's the reality, very normal, very peaceful.
What was the moment, though, when you decided you wanted to convert?
I'd been raised with this idea of God as this kind of human-esque figure, and I never grasped that, because I was always thinking God must be bigger than that. If you walk across the park and if you look at the sky, and you can see some divinity, you can see something beautiful there. And Islam has the idea that God is as close to you as your jugular vein, so in your neck. He's so intertwined with the creation, is so involved in it, that you don't need to send prayers up to heaven, you just need to whisper. That got me thinking. Islam was describing my God back to me. So I've just finished praying, I've just come from the field. They always pray separately, and I think some people get a bit affronted by the way that everything is always so separated out. But actually, there's something strangely freeing about it. When you're surrounded by members of the opposite sex, there's often a lot of pressure to maybe look a certain way and act a certain way. I certainly felt that growing up. I find it much easier to be myself when there's only women around. It increases the spiritual aspect of it because those distractions are removed and it's just about you and God, and I think that's a beautiful part of the prayer.
The realisation that she wanted to convert came to Fataha during a lecture on Islam. The speaker was so inspirational, she left her seat and asked to make the declaration of faith, the Shahada, there and then. But conversion for Miriam Francois Serra was a lengthy intellectual process which involved exploring and analysing several versions of the Quran.
I ended up coming to a conclusion about the Quran which I hadn't expected, but which to me was then, as we say in French, incontournable. There was no way around it. And so for me, it was just then a question of saying, well, am I now going to be intellectually coherent and abide by the outcome of my findings in the way that I've done in every single other area of my life? Or am I going to actually say, that's not really my bag? It sounds right, but I can't really do it.
Some people are reached by the intellectual route and they examine the Quran and they see that there's science in the Quran. Some people are more practical and they like the practices of Islam. Other people are hearts and souls, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reach them and go, feel this. This is what it's all about.
For Lauren Booth, it was this spiritual feeling that overwhelmed her only last year when she sat down amongst the women and children in a busy mosque in the city of Qom in Iran.
It was as if I had been injected with morphine. I've had morphine for operations. Anybody who's had a pre-med will know what I mean. I was just in contact with absolute peace. And I felt the tightness in my chest that we carry around. The stress had gone. The list, I must do this tomorrow and don't forget to do that. There was silence. For the first time in my adult life, there was silence. I slept the night on the floor of the mosque. Woke up in the morning and did the prayer. Went outside to take some fresh air and went, oh my God, Islam, you've got to be kidding me.
But how did you know that spiritual enlightenment, that moment that you had, that was a call to a religion? Surely that could have just been a wonderful moment of peace and relaxation.
Absolutely, and I was hoping it was. I was like, okay, that was nice, thanks very much, good to see you, bye, back to my old life now. And then a quiet voice inside me said, why are you trying to push away the most beautiful feeling you've ever had? Why don't you just go along your life, but be aware of this feeling?
I find it difficult, though, that you had this moment of enlightenment in Iran, which has a terrible record on human rights abuses, particularly when it comes to women.
This has nothing to do with the perception of Iran and the way things are run there. This is to do with the connection between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a person that has been given the chance to have a connection.
But as a journalist, I think I would be very concerned about what was going on politically. Did that never go through your mind?
See, this is a secularist argument, though. You're not accepting that faith is one tier above human experience. I couldn't think about anything else. And the words Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar were like in a loop on a stuck tape around my brain until the day I said Shahada.
Welcome to the Islamic Bazaar. The most stylish girls, they have the little headband with the hijab, and then sometimes you'll see these huge updos, almost like an elaborate hairdo with the scarves, and two tones, so two different coloured scarves sort of wrapped around. It's quite an exciting part of being a Muslim. You're learning your own hijab style.
I was going to say that. You look really excited about that.
I love it. It's great. It's like handbags or shoes. It's great.
Fataha Iman. But as Miriam Francois Serra told me for this BBC programme, wearing the hijab has not been so light-hearted.
The approach that I had to the headscarf fits in very much with a feminist desire to understand why any woman would want to cover herself and cover her hair. Liberation, I think, from a feminist perspective in the European context was very much about removing all of this stuff which was holding us back from experiencing life. Now, I think that's a very different way to the way in which Muslims understand modesty. Muslims say modesty is a means to minimize the extent to which there is a focus on the externality and a way in which to focus on the internal, what's substantive, what's real, your values, your soul, who you are as a human being, and not allow ourselves, I think, as a society to fetishize beauty of the female form. And so I began to see things through that lens. Now, for me, I don't see the headscarf as hugely important. You're a Muslim, whether you wear a headscarf or not. The headscarf is sort of the cherry on the cake for me in terms of my aspirations, but it would still be a cake if you didn't have a cherry on top.
Well, what's the reaction when people see a white woman wearing a scarf?
The primary reaction typically is that people don't recognise me as being white. You are no longer of the white category. You enter the non-white category in which you discover how the rest of the world live. In other words, to my mind, you become a second-class citizen. What was extremely tough for me was walking into shops and cafes and restaurants that I'd gone to for years and suddenly being looked upon with disdain or having service refused to me, as has happened in France. And I think that that's reflective of a large degree of racism, Islamophobia, of this two-tier system which we're in denial about, frankly.
Have your parents accepted your conversion, or were they dismayed?
I think the question I would ask back is, would most parents in this country rather their child went on to become a Hollywood actress, or would they rather she became religious, let alone Muslim? I understand that it's not every parent's dream for their little girl. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Ar-Rahmanirrahim.
I was probably the last one to know. And the first question that my sister asked was, will you still drink? And then she said no, and we both said, yippee.
Lauren Booth's 8-year-old daughter, Holly, has her own dreams.
I asked, will you still smoke? She said, no, I'm not going to smoke either. My sister asked the last question, and it was the funniest question of all. Will you still be our mummy? And Mummy said yes, and made her laugh a lot, because she was still, of course, going to be our mum. But we were really glad that she stopped smoking and drinking, because before we hardly got to spend any time with her as well, because she'd always be going out with her friends and things.
Do you think that you'll convert one day?
Yes, I hope so.
Holly's 10-year-old sister, Alexandra, has already converted. I asked Lauren if young girls are capable of making such an important decision, or had they just been influenced by her?
When children see any positive change in their lives, they should want to mimic it, because they know it's good for them. So when they saw me praying 5 times a day, they saw a peace come about the household, they wanted to copy that. But I have to say, they actually ethically, and on a very kind of deep spiritual level, are on a higher level of Islam than I am. They understand the ethics, and they have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has absolutely nothing to do with me, and sometimes takes my breath away. For example, Alexandra coming to me last week without any pressing at all on my part, quite the opposite. I'm saying slowly, saying, Mum, when I'm 11 I'm going to wear hijab, because it's the right thing to do. That's not me.
What about the reaction of your family and your mother, particularly?
My mum's an Islamophobe, so that was never going to be an easy sell, but I told her the feeling that I had in the mosque. And she was crying and said, wow, that's amazing. I've always wanted peace in my life, and you've been touched by something. I really respect that. I said, really? Mum, I'm thinking of converting to Islam. And she said, I back you 100%. I thought, mashallah, God's really helping with this one. So the next week I saw my mum, and I had a scarf on my head, and she said, what are you wearing that for? And I said, remember I talked about converting to Islam? I'm a Muslim. She went, Muslim? I thought you meant Buddhism. What, those bloody nutters? Sorry for swearing, but that's what she said. And I said, yes, Mum, those nutters. Then I just started being a good daughter, because Islam shows you the mother is everything. She's carried you for 9 months. She's nurtured you. You're going to have a really tough time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you don't make it right. I have to say, for the first time in my life, I have a mother and she has a daughter.
And everyone will want to know what your brother-in-law, Tony Blair, thinks of your conversion as a Middle East peace envoy.
I really don't care what he thinks. And in Islam, it's perfectly clear that you must stand for what is right, even if it means standing against your own family.
Yeah, I think initially they both sort of thought it was a phase. She'll go through a phase and then she'll be Christian again and it'll all be fine. And as it went longer and I didn't grow out of the phase or whatever, it became difficult.
Conversion also spelt family trouble for Fataha Iman.
We don't live close to each other. They haven't seen how happy I am in my daily life. They haven't seen the positive effects that it's had on me. They've only seen a very small part of it when I visited, and they don't understand the decision and they don't agree with the decision. And as parents, they're really worried about me being in this strange alien thing that they've only ever heard very negative things about. And that creates problems because as an adult, I feel like, I'm an adult. I've made a decision. I'm sensible. I'm not going to let myself get caught up in something that puts me at risk. But to them, I'm still their little girl and they're still worried. And sometimes I think they just can't see past that.
Why are they worried about the man you want to marry, your fiancé?
From my father's point of view, his idea of Muslim men and of Islam as a religion and the role that women play in that religion is very negative. His concern is that I'll just be a servant in the house, that I might get beaten, that I might be mistreated. And, the problem, he hasn't met my fiancé.
Has he wanted to meet him?
I'm trying to sort of organise them to meet. It's been quite difficult because my fiancé, from the Asian background, you don't approach the bride's family until you have a job and some money. And then you go very formally and you say, I have a job and some money and I can support a wife. Here, I would like to marry your daughter. Whereas from the English point of view, it's a different process. You date the daughter for a while. And then after, when it gets serious, you meet the parents. And then you say, sir, I'd like to propose to your daughter. And he goes, yes, of course you may. And then you buy a ring and you do it like that. So there's this huge cultural difference in the way that it works. So my fiancé is going, I need to have a job first. When I have a job, I'm going to go and speak to your dad in a very formal way. And my dad's going, why don't I know the man that wants to marry you? I don't understand what's going on. Two trains going in opposite directions. Eventually they're going to meet each other, right? And then they're going to talk to each other, hopefully. And then hopefully they're going to like each other and it's all going to be fine.
Is your fiancé a British citizen? Does that have an impact on your father's view of him?
Definitely, I think it has a negative view because he's not actually British. He's a Pakistani national and came here to study. So now obviously the first thing people say is, oh, he wants your passport. Well, there's other ways to get a passport. Actually, it's easier for him to just apply the normal route. But that's always the misunderstanding. And I'm sure that my parents have thought about it, and I'm sure that's a fear.
Fataha Iman is not alone. Many converts find it takes a long time for family and friends to accept their new identity, if ever. But this isn't the only problem Kevin Bryce of the University of Wales discovered during his research.
First of all, there's the feeling of isolation, the fact that at times they no longer fit into their old lifestyle, but also that there's a lack of acceptance amongst born Muslims, pressures exerted on them to adopt the cultural norms of born Muslims.
My first experience of going into a mosque near my parents' home was being shooed out of the main entrance and being told to, go over there and through the back entrance by the bins where the women were supposed to go into a windowless room with no fan, listening to the Friday sermon on a speaker which was intermittent, so that what we were actually hearing was, and men, women should, and had absolutely no clue what he was talking about. So it absolutely was a culture shock because, of course, I learnt about Islam in a very theoretical fashion. I learnt about Islam from books. And so the view that I had of it was, dare I say it, idealistic and rosy and perfect. And yet, sometimes I'd encounter people who were so far removed from that I didn't feel at home.
Miriam Francois Serra. Fataha Iman had to negotiate her way among some very strict members of her new community.
You will find people who go, all women should be in the niqab, everybody needs to wear a veil, and a few voices like that. I live right next door to this huge, beautiful, purpose-built new mosque. I'm not allowed in. There's no ladies, but they're all like, we don't need to let the ladies in the mosque.
Have you thought about going up and knocking on the door and saying, let me in?
It's a bit tempting to sort of bang the door down and go, look, I spoke to a scholar, he said you should let me in, so I'm going to pray in the back somewhere. You know what you're going to get? A lot of old men staring at you. Why is she here? A panic going round that there's a woman in the mosque. People cling on to that old cultural idea, and as Islam in Britain becomes more British, and starts to absorb converts and people from different backgrounds, it starts to change. It's changing, and you're seeing now people are going, yeah, why not? Let's have a women's bit. Go for it. What's the worst that could happen?
Acceptance of Muslim women is still some way off, whether it's in the mosque or, as Miriam Francois Serra told me for this edition of Heart and Soul from the BBC World Service, in TV and film. Miriam's decision to wear a headscarf and dress modestly has taken its toll on the career she loves.
The pool of parts is a lot smaller than it was. Moving into the adult genre was something that I already had a great deal of anxiety with. I used to share it with my parents. I was saying, well, this part's come along, but it's got a sex scene, and frankly, that's to me degrading and humiliating and not something I would be happy with.
What about showing your hair? Would you show your hair on camera?
No, I wouldn't, because for me that remains within the level of dress that I maintain outside, when I'm...
But that's going to make it very difficult in most roles, I would say.
I think there are ways around it. I do think that we'll gradually see more and more diversity on screen. I mean, the Doctor in the series will just happen to be wearing a headscarf. She'll just happen to be a Muslim, and you know what? It doesn't need to be part of the storyline. The plot doesn't need to be about a forced marriage. She can just happen to be a Muslim doctor. Letting Muslims be the same as anybody else's, and not making them into these reified identities in which the only thing that can affect Muslims are Muslim issues.